Did it go anywhere?
No, my computer chose today to do updates. And it was going to shut down in 2 hours. So,
Somebody likes that. Okay. No. Hopefully it's done updating. Oh, it's the next one this morning. So. Hey, man. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
We'll wait 1 second for Commissioner Keel, then we'll get going again. Actually, we'll just get rolling again. So let's go to agenda item number 9, Fisheries Division Program Overview Informational. Division Administrator Chris Crookshanks and Fisheries Division staff Kim Tisdale, Travis Hawks, Cody Byrne, Pat Kelly, Brandon Sanger, Kevin Netcher, and Christy Klinger. A presentation will be provided on the Fisheries Division programs.
Chairman Cavilla, Commissioners, thank you. For the record, Chris Crookshanks, Fisheries Division Administrator. Because it's a fisheries-centric commission meeting, we wanted to just take a few moments and give an overview of the Fisheries Division. And before we get started, for the presentation we're going to give you, I've got all my staff, headquarters staff here to help out. I wanted to introduce them real quick, as well as some other staff that we have here. So for the presentation, we have Christy Klinger. She's our native aquatics staff specialist at Reno headquarters. Kim Tisdale is our state lead for sport fish. Pat Kelly runs our hatchery program. And Kevin Netcher is in charge of our AIS program. I also wanted to point out in attendance today, and you'll get to hear from them tomorrow, are Travis Hawks. If you could stand up real quick. He's our Western Region Supervising Fisheries Biologist. Cody Byrne is our Supervising Biologist for the Eastern Region, and Brandon Sanger, who you heard from this morning, is our Supervising Biologist for the Southern Region. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with a presentation we put together for you on an overview of the Fisheries Division. So our mission is to provide effective conservation and protection of Nevada's fisheries and aquatic resources through efficient and science-based management and allow maximum recreational opportunities to the angling public. It's a real wordy to say that we manage fish and we try to increase fishing opportunities and protect and conserve native species as well. So like I just talked about, our core service programs, Sport Fish, who is headed up by Kim Tisdale. Sport Fish Production is Pat Kelly is in charge of that program. Our Native Aquatic Species Management is Christy Klinger, and our AIS program is Kevin Netcher. Statewide, we employ approximately 43 individuals. That includes 5 headquarters staff, that's myself, and the 4 staff individuals that we have here today, as well as the 3 regional supervisors that I also introduced. Across 3 administrative regions, we have 19 biologists. These biologists employ seasonal staff, anywhere from 8 to 15 seasonal staff for AIS, and staff conservation aides that assist our biologists. This also, we have 12 fish hatchery technicians across our hatchery program, which we'll hear about more in just a second. 5 AIS species program technicians, and 2 shared administrative assistants in headquarters. And the picture here is from our fisheries coordination meeting that we had this past year out at the Rafter 7 on the Walker River. I just thought it was a really, really neat glimpse at the best division in NDOW. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kim Tisdale, who's in charge of our sport fish program.
Thank you. As Chris said, I'm Kim Tisdale. I'm a sport fish staff specialist for the Fisheries Division. And just going to give you a little overview of the sport fish management program. But first, I just wanted to talk just quickly about our funding source, where we get the funding to do what we do out there. The Sportfish Restoration Program was developed, it was modeled off of the Pittman-Robertson Act. So they take an excise tax on fishing equipment and electric motors, and then also a portion of gasoline tax attributed to motorboats. And so this is a national program, so all that money goes into a pot. It's kind of interesting, my whole career, I kind of thought that fishing tackle, the excise tax that they put on fishing tackle was kind of the bulk of, that pot of money. But when I took the grant management class from the Fish and Wildlife Service, I learned that the portion of gasoline tax actually, it makes up 70 cents of every dollar in that program. So the tax on gasoline is really what's keeping us afloat. So really glad they put that little part in there. So they put all this money into a pot, and then the Fish and Wildlife Service, who administers the program, apportions it out to all of the states and territories, and they use a formula that's based on 60% the number of fishing license holders and 40% the state size in square miles. So again, really glad that they didn't go off of surface acres of water, because we don't have a whole lot of water in Nevada, but we do have a very big state, so that helps us. So that's our federal portion. We match it by 25%, and we use our fishing license dollars to do that. And so the Sportfish Restoration Program funds sportfish management and production, which is our hatcheries, and then also conservation education's aquatic education program, and then also the boating access program. So while we might be the driest state in the nation, we do have a multitude of different fish species and places where people can fish. We have over 500 fishable waters in the state and 30 different game fish species. And so we just have a lot of great fishing opportunities and places to visit. Okay, the purpose of the Sportfish Management Program is under the guidance of Commission Policy 33, which is the fisheries management policy. We're responsible for the management and conservation of Nevada's sportfish and native sportfish species, and also the habitats on which they rely. And we have some main focus areas that we work under to improve and expand angling opportunity, to enhance and restore aquatic habitats, conserve and enhance native sportfish populations, and then also outreach and engagement with the public to increase angler recruitment and also gain better community support. So I'm going to talk about the programs that we have under each of those focal areas. So in improving and expanding angling opportunities, we have our survey and inventory program. This is the bulk of what our fisheries biologists do. We monitor fisheries to ensure that they're reaching their management objectives. We also monitor angler use and success to make sure that our angling objectives are being met. And then we conduct habitat monitoring to make sure that aquatic and riparian habitats are functioning properly to support healthy sportfish populations. So all of that monitoring and the results that we get from that help to inform our management decisions, like in developing our stocking recommendations, which we do every year, proposing regulation changes, which we do every 2 years, what we're doing here at this meeting this weekend, and then also tells us where we might need to conduct habitat enhancement, and it helps us to really understand the resource so we can provide good technical advice to our federal land management agencies on matters that might affect sportfish and their habitats. Okay, also under that category of improving and expanding angling opportunities, we have our urban fishery program. This is, urban fisheries have been around for many, many decades, but in the last couple decades, we've been really focusing on trying to expand those opportunities to, we've always had a lot of urban ponds in Las Vegas and the Reno area, but we've been trying to provide these ponds in some of our smaller towns, and I think we've had a lot of success over the last couple decades. Right now, statewide, we have 27 different urban ponds throughout the state, and we have another 2 that are coming online here in the next few years. We've got the Battleborn Pond, which is in Spanish Springs, north of Reno Sparks area. This is a pretty big pond. It's like 80 acres, and this is one of the few urban ponds where NDOW actually will own the property. So we have acquired this property, and it will be managed under the Wildlife Management Area program. And so we have that urban pond coming online. We've been stocking it. We've been putting warm water game fish in there, and look forward to that being a very popular pond. We also have the 12th Street Pond, which is in Elko. This one is a couple years out. They're still working on developing the pond, acquiring a property that's adjacent to it, which will add another couple ponds to it. So that's an urban pond in Elko that will be Elko's first urban fishery. And so we're excited to see how that one develops. And then we have our warm water fishing opportunities. So also over the past couple decades, we've been really trying to improve and expand our warm water fisheries. We use heritage funding to purchase fish to stock into some of our larger reservoirs and urban ponds. So we use that funding to buy channel catfish to put into urban ponds to provide fishing during the summer when it's kind of too hot for trout. And then also we buy wipers, which are a sterile fish, so they don't reproduce, so we have to buy them. And we put those into our larger reservoirs like Wild Horse and South Fork and Rye Patch and Lahontan. And they grow to very large sizes. They're popular, and they also serve as kind of a biological control for some of the smaller fish species that could overpopulate without a fair amount of predation on them. In addition to purchasing fish, we also work pretty hard at identifying where we have very robust warm water fish populations, and then we utilize those to trap those fish and then move them to other waters that maybe need augmentation to improve those fisheries. So we're really trying to establish warm water fisheries throughout the state to increase angling opportunity. And then also under that we have promoting underutilized species like carp. So carp are not a game species, but they're pretty much everywhere, and they get very big, and they're pretty fun to catch. So we encourage people to go out there and utilize that resource that's out there, even though we don't actively manage them. Conservation Education Division actually has a kids carp fishing derby that happens at Lahontan every year, and that's really fun. We chum the beach and get all the carp to come in and then throw a little rod in their hands, and kids will catch these big fish all day. It's great. It's a great program. So. Okay, so maintain and restore aquatic habitats. At Lake Mojave, they've been doing this for decades. They have this giant habitat barge that was actually donated to us from one of the big Bass Federation clubs. And they utilize an army of volunteers to create these habitat structures, and they drop them into coves all throughout Lake Mojave to improve habitat conditions. You know, a lot of these big reservoirs, they don't have really good aquatic habitat, and you need that for, you know, small fish to be able to recruit to larger fish. And so we have to go into some of these bigger reservoirs and actually add the habitat to improve the survival of these fish. So, and in the northern part of the state, over the past decade, we've also been working on finding funding to introduce artificial habitat in some of our other reservoirs like Lahontan and Rye Patch and Wild Horse and South Fork. So those efforts are ongoing. And then we also work on improving degraded habitats. You'll see that picture, that upper right picture. Chris alluded to it in his earlier discussion about beaver analog, or beaver dam analogs. Basically what it is, when you have incised channels like that, you can, and we don't have beavers to kind of build up ponds and stuff. So we actually go in there and then we kind of build a structure that mimics a beaver dam, and that helps to like collect the sediment and helps to kind of build up that incised channel, forces the water up onto the floodplain, saturates those soils, so it allows the riparian to recover. So we've been doing more and more of those projects over the years, and they seem to be very successful. Oh, and then I also have minimum pool agreements. We're always on the lookout for minimum pool agreements. We have one in Knott Creek Reservoir where we acquired 1,000 acre-feet minimum pool, which has allowed us to create a heck of a trophy fishery up there. So water is rare and expensive in the state, so we don't get the opportunity very often, but we're always on the lookout for those opportunities. Okay, also under the sport fish program, we conserve and enhance native sport fish populations. So under the sport fish program, we manage Lahontan cutthroat trout, Bonneville cutthroat trout, Yellowstone cutthroat trout, inland rainbow trout, and mountain whitefish. The only native trout that's not in our program is bull trout, which is endangered. So it's covered under the Section 6 program, which Christy will talk about later. The LCT is a threatened species, so that is our most robust native trout program that we have. The eastern and the western region have LCT biologists, and we hire conservation aides in the summer to help us do our work. So they're out there every summer surveying and monitoring these trout populations. Our biologists are also an integral part of the interagency recovery teams that are helping to recover LCT across its range. In addition to monitoring and survey, we also work on non-native trout removal and reintroduction efforts. And most recently, we've been working on genetic rescue, where a lot of our LCT are occupying very isolated small stream systems. So over the years, genetically, they just kind of, it's kind of stagnant. So with genetic rescue, we take populations, we'll take a few fish from each population and kind of move it between the different populations to kind of improve genetic diversity. The other species here all have limited distribution throughout the state, but there's still a conservation priority, so we manage and ensure their persistence as well. And then finally, the public outreach and engagement portion of the program. We have our angler recognition programs, the trophy fish program, where people can catch fish, and we will recognize them for catching fish over a minimum size. So we get people submitting trophy fish entries, and then at the end of the year, we do put together a publication with all their pictures, and so that's a popular program. And then we also have the Native Fish Slam, which this is a program that was initiated in 2012. So this program recognizes anglers for catching one of each of the 6 native salmonids in the state. There's not a time limit on it, so they just, anytime because all the fish aren't in one place, so you really have to travel Nevada to get to all of these spots. And so when they catch their fish, they turn it in, we keep track of everything they caught, and at the end, they get, a certificate and a hat, and they get to be proud that they caught every native trout in the state. We also have our angler information guides, which we update every year, and it's online. So it helps anglers to, understand how their waters are doing. Our biologists have worked hard to upgrade those over the past couple of years. So now it's not just general information about a fishery. The biologists are taking their monitoring information and they're incorporating it into these angler information pages. So they're a wealth of information for our anglers. We have the Fish Nevada online mapping tool, which allows people to go online and then they can kind of sort out, like they can look for which waters have smallmouth bass, and it'll tell you. It's like a mapping tool, and so that's some good information for our anglers. We have the Trout in the Classroom program that we partner with Conservation Education Division on. It's very popular all across the state. And then, of course, we have our regulation simplification, which we're always striving to make regulations more understandable to our angling public to, encourage them to get out and not be uncomfortable about knowing what the regulations are. And then I'll pass it over to Pat, talk about the hatchery program.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Glad you're here. For the record, I'm Pat Kelly. I oversee the fish hatchery program for the state. If you haven't been to any or all of our facilities, I'd encourage you to get out there. They're kind of cool it's an amazing work of art. That's all I'm going to say. These things, to be able to create fish in the driest nation, or driest state in the nation is pretty phenomenal. So I want to just kind of go over these really quick. My presentation is pretty fast. I am kind of one of those guys that believes a picture is worth 1,000 words. So with that, we do have Mason Valley Hatchery, which is outside of Yerington, Nevada. We've got Gallagher Hatchery, which is basically located in Ruby Valley. We have Lake Mead, which is here in Boulder City. And we also have Spring Creek Rearing Station, which is just outside the town of Baker. So basically right here, we're just kind of showing you some pictures of planting fish, some of them being thrown obviously through nets, some of them going through tubes. The hatchery program, like the sport fish program that Kim had mentioned, is primarily funded through federal sport fish restoration funds, Dignell Johnson basically. It is a 75-25% split, and we basically match that 25% with what used to be trout stamp funds. We now use a percentage that comes out of our license sales. And also excise tax on fishing equipment and motorboat fuels, as Kim had mentioned. Hatchery program, between our 3 cold water facilities, approximately 900,000 fish are planted every year out of these 3 cold water facilities, which is, like I say, it's incredible that we're actually able to do that in the driest state in the nation. Roughly, probably, well, between 180 and 200 bodies of water, whether it be lakes, reservoir streams, ponds, and that basically includes, as I say, cold water trout, rainbow, cutthroat. We did start doing a YY brook trout program last year that we are trying to look at, trying to eradicate some of the brook trout in some of these little area creeks within the state. We also do brown trout, bowcut, and tiger trout, which have become very, very popular over the last few years. And I've got just 2 little videos, and this basically, the first one will show you just kind of the flooding that occurred in Mason Valley this year. The hatchery, as you can see, was primarily an island this year, so we basically had to evaluate families that were on the facility. We left 2 to 3 guys on site basically to feed the fish and to basically answer alarms, keep pumps running, and do general maintenance that is required for the facility. And again, like I say, you can primarily see that the flood waters were extreme. I've been at this area for over 20 years, and I've yet to see a flooding event like this. I hope not to see another flooding event like that, in that we were, again, an island. We were not able to get any trucks on or off station. Our families, again, had to be evacuated since we couldn't get any kind of emergency medical into that facility in the event that they needed it. So, again, it was quite the event that it was neat. But again, it's not something that you'd like to have happen year in and year out. And I don't suspect we will, but we'll just have to wait and see what Mother Nature has in store for us. Can you proceed on to the next one, Doug? Thank you. And then this one is just a real quick clip of our department basically working together. We had multiple divisions working simultaneously to airlift approximately 4,400 pounds of fish feed, basically in the dry zone over the top of all of our flooding and into the facility. Our fish basically didn't want to quit eating just because we had floodwaters. So with that, we were able to devise a plan to bring, like I said, about 4,400 pounds of fish feed into the facility, utilizing the department helicopter, which was just absolutely phenomenal that we had that ability to do. It kept our fish fed and kept things running for, about a month. So we were super, super gracious with our game division for allowing us to utilize that helicopter, and as I say, other divisions for helping us in loading the pallets, loading the nets, taking film footage, and all of that. So it was really kind of an awesome effort by everybody. And again, as I say, this is just kind of a little quick clip to show kind of the challenges that we saw this year. So again, thank you very much, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Christy Klinger. I'm the Fisheries Division Native Aquatic Species Staff Specialist, and I oversee and manage the grants for the Native Aquatics Program, which involves over 100 species of native fish, amphibians, and mollusks, 27 of which happen to be federally threatened or endangered. So diverse and flourishing native aquatic species populations are usually indicators of good water, clean water, and fully functioning, intact, riparian areas. And NDOW has a responsibility to conserve and maintain and restore these native aquatic species and their habitats. Among other things, this program focuses on trying to prevent future additional Endangered Species Act listings. And through the implementation of various conservation agreements and strategies for native aquatic species such as the Columbia spotted frog, the Bonneville cutthroat trout, and Nevada spring snails, we've been able to effectively preclude listing a lot of these species and many others. Cooperation and coordination with federal, state, and private partners is a key aspect to recovering and delisting species. And it's not without note that the threats to native aquatic species are many. Too many to list here, but a couple of them are habitat loss, groundwater issues, and as we learned, or as we heard a little bit about earlier, non-native invasive species, sorry. So the Native Aquatics Program is primarily funded by two sources. One is the State Wildlife Grant, or SWG, and that's a congressional appropriation annually. These funds can only be used for conservation of species that are identified in the Nevada State Wildlife Action Plan. The other source of funding for the Native Aquatics Program is made possible through Section 6 of the Endangered Species Act, which provides a mechanism for cooperation between the service and the states. These funds can also only be used for voluntary conservation projects for species that are either already listed, candidate species, or species at risk. So the sheer number and variety of species that are managed under the Native Aquatics Program is many and diverse. Of the 79 native fish species that we have, including recognized subspecies, 18 of those are federally endangered and 6 are listed as threatened. We have one that's currently petitioned. It's the Fish Lake Valley tui chub, and it's being reviewed by the Fish and Wildlife Service currently. And its reason for petitioning is due to groundwater pumping. 52, I found this really interesting, 52 of those 79 native fish species are endemic to Nevada, meaning they're found in Nevada and nowhere else on the planet. We also have a couple bivalves and mussels and 15 frogs and toads, and literally an unknown number of unique spring snail species. And I'm going to be super brief. I'm just going to wrap this up with a couple, I'm not going to read these, but just a couple highlights from this program over the last year. Chris mentioned this earlier in the division notes the fish that's being held in the upper left photo is the Paranagate round-tailed chub. This is an endangered species, that it is quite possible that this species may be functionally extinct in the wild as of this year. Last year, there were 2 individuals documented during surveys. This year, despite extensive and exhaustive surveys, we have found no chub in the 2.2 miles of its remaining habitat. The main reason for this, we think, is an invasion of carp, green sunfish, and then some water management challenges. Thankfully, there is a captive rescue population of this species that's being maintained at a Fish and Wildlife Service facility in New Mexico. And recently, we have secured funding to rehabilitate and restore a pond for this species at Key Pittman Wildlife Management Area and also one at the Paranagate National Wildlife Refuge. And then I'll just wrap mine up on a positive note. I have a picture on here of the Devil's Hole pupfish, this tiny range-restricted, highly endangered species, which arguably some have said is maybe the rarest vertebrate species on the planet. This species has had some of its highest population estimates in nearly 2 decades. There was a whopping 263 fish that were counted last fall. And you might not think that's great, but it's pretty good. At one point, there was an estimate that maybe this fish was as low as 35 individuals in the wild. The next scuba dive survey for this fish is actually next week, and it's going to be filmed by Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. So for any of you old timers that remember watching that show on Sunday evening, that's pretty cool that they're going to be highlighting one of our Southern Nevada native species. And with that, so keep an eye out for that. It's returning to NBC this fall. With that, I'll turn over to Kevin. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Kevin Netcher, staff specialist for the record. So I oversee our aquatic invasive species program. So unlike Christy and Pat and Kim, my program likes to kill a lot of species. And so these are some of our more common species that we work with: northern pike, American bullfrog. There's a photo of a red claw crayfish up there too for reference. And the 2 bottom photos are quagga boats infested with quagga mussels from Lake Mead. And so for my program, our water inspection and decontamination stations are a very big part of our program. Currently, this is where we have stations in the state of Nevada. Our stations associated with Lake Mead and Lake Mojave and on the Colorado River are our containment stations. And so their primary purpose are to contain quagga mussels to the lower Colorado. Where all the other stations listed are prevention stations, and they inspect watercraft before they're allowed to launch into these reservoirs. And their goal is to prevent new infestations from occurring. And all the stations that operate at Lake Tahoe are actually run by the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency under existing authorities. So just some information about our WID stations, and unfortunately it's been a rough week for AIS in the West, so this slide is now outdated. But in 2022, we performed 17,000 inspections and approximately 781 decontaminations. 96% of those decontaminations occurred at Lake Mead and Mojave, and those were of infested boats that were deconned before they were allowed to go anywhere else. In that photo is one of our employees, Mark Schofstall, decontaminating a boat. But the remaining 4 were decontaminations that occurred at our prevention stations. So they caught infested watercraft before they were allowed to launch into uninfested waters. And so, yeah, that bottom line is now outdated because of news out of Idaho, but previously it was 16 years without any new quagga infestations in the West. But my program isn't just quagga mussels. We also support a lot of other programs within the fisheries division. We do have extensive quagga and zebra mussel monitoring in northern Nevada in uninfested waters. And this is trying to catch infestations before they are able to take hold, and if we can, eliminate them, eradicate them if possible. I also support northern pike suppression at Cummins Lake near Ely, Nevada. My program also supplies funding for common carp removal at Chimney Reservoir. And Kim alluded to, we sometimes promote carp fishing where it's appropriate. At Chimney Reservoir, it's severely impacting the sport fish. So that's why we're removing the carp from that system. The Australian red claw crayfish eradication that we heard about earlier today, my program primarily paid for most of that effort. And also I support YY male fish research through the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And this is a new novel eradication effort that's being developed. And that is, through this program, you can essentially turn an entire population of a fish species male, which would really lead to their eradication because they're unable to reproduce. And we really like catchy slogans in the AIS world, but public outreach is crucial to stopping the spread of a lot of these species. These are some of the programs that NDOW participates in. Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers is a national program. Pull Your Plug, that's an NDOW program. It just reinforces that you need to pull your drain plug before moving your boat between waters. And Don't Let It Loose and Don't Ditch a Fish are programs that target pet owners and try to tell them why it's never a good idea to release an unwanted pet, which is probably how we got the red claw crayfish. Somebody had them and they released them in those ponds, and now we're dealing with this eradication effort. And that's all I had.
Any questions? Commissioner McNitch. Thank you. So, are we asking questions of everybody at this point, or?
Yeah, absolutely. You can
Okay.
ask questions pertaining to
right.
everything you saw. Absolutely.
Okay. So, with the urban fisheries, what cities or towns don't have an urban fishery, and are there conversations about putting them in there? They're pretty popular, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, they're really popular. They get a lot of use, and they're important because, you know, our communities are very urbanized. And a lot of people never leave the city. So they don't get to experience some of the reservoirs and stuff that you know we can drive to. They just have to stay in the city. So it's important to bring fisheries to them. One of the, I think most of our, you know, kind of bigger towns in Nevada have them. Elko's getting theirs. The one that doesn't is Fernley. And there have been recent discussions with some folks in Fernley about developing some urban ponds along the Truckee Canal, because they're going to be, you know, the Truckee Canal has kind of been the urban fishery in Fernley. We would stock the canal and people would fish it, but they're laying cement in the canal now, because after the big flood and all of the gophers that drilled holes, and they had that big flood in Fernley because of it. So they're cementing the canal. So we're looking at some different opportunities to work with, you know, their government to, you know, and maybe we'll probably eventually be coming to, you know, some of the, you know, heritage funding or something like that to try and fund a new pond there. So there's discussions there. I think that's the only pond the only town in Nevada that.
Chris Crookshanks for the record. Just to add to what Kim was saying, in those communities that don't currently have urban ponds, we're in discussions in Fernley. Ely's another community that we're currently in discussions to have an urban pond. We've taken a good hard look at a lot of communities that didn't have them in recent years, and we've filled those gaps, like, you know, the James Kinney at Winnemucca. But those ones that don't have them, we're actively in discussions. Another one that we're in early discussions is Tonopah, to answer your question.
Yeah, and I know at one point there was, I had it in my mind that Hawthorne was having issues with one that they had, or, you know.
Yeah, in Hawthorne, we do have the Rose Creek Reservoir, which actually isn't in Hawthorne. It's up there on the depots. You have to go up to the top of the mountain. So that's actually managed as a 3 game fish limit. So that's their urban pond, but it's not actually urban. So yeah, Hawthorne would be another good town that we could get one in. But yeah, we're working on them.
That's good. I think that they're popular for sure. So, yeah. I had a couple of other questions. So with the Paranagit round-tailed chub, so Christy, the issues that have led to not finding them at Paranagit, those have been addressed to the point where, or they're not going back in that water specifically, but using the Fish and Wildlife Service stock, the issues are being managed so that they don't blink out too?
Correct, yeah, Christy Klinger for the record. We're not 100% sure that they are no longer in the natural system of part of the the waterways in Pahranagat Valley have been highly developed, and all the water's been channelized into ditches. And the water management issues over the years have slowly led to the ability for carp and green sunfish to invade that system. And it was pretty shocking last year when we only came up with 2 individuals. And so far, it was really disconcerting that we couldn't find any this year. We've had, I don't know how many extra surveys done with folks from Fish and Wildlife Service and NDOW. And so we did have a pond, a refugium on Cape Pittman previously that was functioning. And then during COVID shutdown, there was a well malfunction that created a dissolved oxygen problem, and the fish in that pond ceased to exist. So, and then similarly, there's a pond at Pahranagat Wildlife Refuge that we're trying to get back up and running. Whether or not the fish will be from the captive population in New Mexico will ever be put back into its original habitat, we're having discussions right now with the Fish and Wildlife Service about what to do when we come to that. But hopefully, we're hoping to have the ponds, the refuge ponds, back up online and stocked with fish by sometime early next year, next summer.
Yeah, that was, I wasn't expecting that, so that was kind of a bummer for sure. So,
for sure.
Okay. And the last question I had was, when I was at Waffle, Utah was talking about implementing a hot dip for, Kevin, for their AIS stuff. Has there been any conversation here? It seemed like, I don't know, on the surface, it seems pretty effective and simple, but I don't know if it's tangible.
Yeah, so Utah is the only state that's currently using those hot dip tanks, and they're out at Lake Powell. Problem we have right now is the water level at Lake Mead. They're very expensive to install, and I can't tell you from year to year which ramp will be operable. So we would hate to make that commitment and then add a ramp that will no longer be operable in like 10 years. And then additionally, other states such as Oregon and Idaho, those dip tanks don't actually physically remove the mussels, they just kill them. And so boat owners who got infested boat dip tanked at Utah, if they still go to Idaho, under Idaho state law or laws, they will still quarantine that boat, even though those mussels are dead. So yeah, there's some issues still with those dip tanks. They work great at killing the mussels, but other states still have some problems with them.
So you think that there's a path forward on them possibly? Because I mean, it seems like that's a real effective way of killing them, at least.
It is, but the methods we use right now are also very effective. So we use decontamination stations at Lake Mead that heats the water to approximately 130 degrees, and we flush entire innards of the boat with that hot water, and that is proven effective at killing 100% of the mussels. And we also pressure wash the exterior of the boat to remove all the evidence of the mussels.
Commissioner Keel.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Kaviga. Yeah, and this is to anybody that wants to address it, but just could you characterize the state of fishing and fisheries in Nevada? I mean, I think, and maybe it's not apparent to me, but we get a good sense of that on the game side. I mean, we know mule deer are down, sheep are down slightly, elk are stable, that type of thing. But just how would you characterize the overall state of fishing now as opposed to 15 years ago, 30 years ago?
For the record, Chris Crookshanks, I can tell you, Commissioner Keel, it's a whole lot better this year than it was last year.
Right.
Just because precipitation, fish are a fantastic critter to manage, because all it takes is one really good year, and you see some compensatory responses in a lot of your populations on the landscape. How is fishing now compared to years ago? I would argue that it's much better. If you look at our urban fishery program, we're able to introduce, a generation or a generation and a half ago, we had a much higher percentage of our population live in the rural area. Those people grew up hunting and fishing. We've seen that huge shift to urban, and people haven't had opportunities to fish. So our urban fishery program is just one way that we can introduce people to fishing that don't have that opportunity. It's great for introducing kids. It's also great for some of our older folks that can't get around too good anymore. We've done away with a lot of our historic stream stocking. We used to stock every stream in the state with hatchery trout. We got away from doing a lot of that, and a lot of our public said, well, what, you're not stocking streams anymore. There's no fish. No, we stopped stocking a lot of our streams because those populations of fish in streams throughout the state are self-reproducing. They do just fine by themselves. They don't need stocking on an annual basis. And just a shout out to stream fishing. It's one of those dying arts. But we're always seeking to expand opportunities statewide, not only with the urban fishing, with all fishing opportunities. We've expanded the number of species in the state. We've expanded our warm water fishing. So I would say I'm not going to lie that 7 years of drought prior to this past winter, we felt it hard. When you see a lot of your waters, that are half the size that they should be, and fish distributions and streams are, half of what they should be. Drought really hits us hard, but, this last winter was good. But, as far as opportunities, I would argue that we're doing really good.
Perfect, thank you.
Vice Chair Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question. It seems like as I travel around and talk to sportsmen and women who love to get out and fish, I seem to always get a question about Commons Lake. And I'm just curious, everybody that I've talked to or has asked me about it, hey, the fishing is way down, the coloration of the water, it's a different color. Just curious, and some people asking me, hey, are they poisoning the lake? Are they thinking about poisoning the lake? So just curious what, if anything, is going on with Commons Lake.
Just want to make sure you're talking about Cummins Lake near Ely?
Yes.
Cummins Lake it's known as a phenomenal trout and bass fishery. In the absence of pike, it has one of the fastest growth rates on fish in the state, and it just grows giant fish based on the feed available to the fish there. Pike were illegally introduced there in around 1998-99. The pike population expanded to the point where we stopped stocking trout in Cummins Lake in 2007. At that point, the pike took over and just decimated the fishery, which we knew that they would. We subsequently eradicated Cummins Lake again, and we're not certain if the eradication wasn't successful or somebody helped us out and put pike back in there. But a self-reproducing population of pike is in Cummins Lake again. Rather than hands off and letting things go, we've got a really aggressive suppression program going on for Cummins Lake and the northern pike right now. We're doing a lot of really novel stuff that we've not done before. We're implanting tags in fish, acoustic tags so we can follow those fish during the spawning period, so we can determine where these fish are spawning and target a suppression effort there. So we have a pretty aggressive suppression program on the pike, and yeah, we agree. It's the water quality is great there. We've never had problems with water quality. It's just those dang pike are awful.
Additional questions, or Commissioner McNinch?
So the YY, is it something that could wreak a little havoc on the pike population, doing something with that, or does it take too long, or what's the?
No, Commissioner McNitch, thank you for the question. The whole YY program is relatively new. Idaho started it with brook trout in relation to the conservation of native trout species, particularly some of the cutthroat species. We have an experimental program in Nevada out at Able Creek in Humboldt County, a YY brook trout program. I just at WAFA this past summer, they were able to almost prove 100% success with YY brook trout in Idaho. The stream they've been working on up there, they went back this year and they found two female fish. So they're that close to claiming 100% success. But more to your question, Commissioner McNitch, is they're developing, it looks like things are going really good for brook trout. and they're developing, looking to other species, and one of those species that they're looking at creating YY fish for right now is northern pike. Because there's problems throughout the western United States and Alaska. Northern pike has been a species that's been identified as the next, experiment for YY, for a YY program, which we'd be, extremely interested in.
Additional questions? I've got one just regarding the Lake Mead hatchery. Where are we at with the water situation to the hatchery?
If we're still, and Brandon can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're, water delivery was on track for, I believe, this December or January. Is that still correct, Brandon? 2024, yes, I'm sorry, 2024.
Thank you. All right, any additional questions? Looks like none. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for taking a moment and letting us tell you what we do, and thanks to all my staff here today for the hard work that they do. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate the presentation, so. All right, agenda item number 10, Wine Cup Gamble Land Exchange discussion for possible action. Eastern Region Supervising Habitat Biologist Caleb McAdoo. The department will provide an update to the commission on the recent developments regarding the Wine Cup Gamble Land Exchange. The commission will have the opportunity to discuss potential input or actions. I think they have your title wrong on there too. I just recognize that.
I think technically I don't start till October.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
that's why I'm just sitting in the nosebleed seats, Good afternoon, Chairman Cavilla, members of the commission. Appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of you this afternoon. We had the meeting in August in Fallon and had a good presentation by Western Lands Group on behalf of the Wine Cup Gamble Ranch, and at that time, the commission had requested a update on the department's correspondence and our feedback with them on this land exchange. So we just wanted to go through that with you today and talk through what that correspondence has been. So before I get too far into my short presentation, I thought it would be good to review Commission Policy 64. I think it's just absolutely pertinent to the discussions we're having and what's before us. There's four basic criteria that Commission Policy 64 states when it's giving the department guidance in considering land exchanges and land sales. And I'll just read them if you bear with me. But item 1, public lands providing high wildlife values should remain in public ownership to ensure the future protection of these values unless higher values for wildlife can be attained through a sale, transfer, or exchange. Number 2, land exchanges should be supported only when wildlife values on selected lands are equal to or greater than those wildlife values or potential wildlife values on offered lands. Criteria 3, input on all input on all public land transactions should consider the need for public access to and through both the offered and selected lands. And number 4, all land transactions must be in the public interest from a wildlife habitat protection and wildlife use standpoint. So I think very well-written policy in our opinion, and again, very pertinent to this discussion. So I want to get into kind of the introduction and timeline that the department has interacted with Western Lands Group. Before I get into that, the department does want to recognize Western Lands Group coming to us early in the development of this process. They approached us pretty informally in 2022, kind of conceptually talking about, looking at a land exchange to clean up some of the checkerboard parcels in that area. And, historically, I would say we support land exchanges when they meet those criteria identified in the previous slide. And so we met with them in 22, had some informal discussions, talked about general resource values, wildlife, important wildlife areas, met with them in the field. But really the rubber kind of met the road this spring in 2023. they requested a formal meeting with NDOW to start discussing what I think their ultimate plan was, or maybe an early version of their plan. And they presented a map at that time, and our further discussions with them, really that map, as they describe it, is really a boundary of possibilities, considering their ownership and grazing allotments. And so that meeting in the spring, the department was provided a copy of that map. At that time, in the community of Elko, word was starting to get out about this land exchange, and the department received a formal public records request requesting data and maps, correspondence documents about the land exchange. So moving into this summer, Elko Cab took a very high interest in this topic, as you can imagine, so that the topic has been agendized, I think, at every meeting since this summer at the Elko County Cab. And Western Lands Group during the summer also provided a written document kind of clarifying some of that map to the department, which we reviewed and provided back some initial concerns and considerations to them. Shortly thereafter, the Wildlife Commission had them present in August, as I spoke about. So fast forwarding kind of to present day, or this fall, Mike and Alan and I met with Western Lands Group about 2 weeks ago at their request. And at that time, they advised us that they are looking at revising their timeline, reiterated the position that, the map is really not a final map, really that boundary of possibilities type scenario. And I'll get into some of those recommendations that we gave them in that meeting. They were really wanting, excuse me, they were really wanting the department's involvement in helping guide this transaction from a wildlife view. It's clear they understand the importance of wildlife in the area, and I think they see that as a primary driver in the outcomes of this exchange. So really our concerns have been pretty consistent through the process. These are kind of those high level overarching concerns. There's of course intricacies and that type of thing when you start diving into parcels, which we have not done. But these overarching concerns are, of course, lack of public access, ensuring an overall benefit to wildlife. Again, consistent with Policy 64, the department's concerns are very much in step and in accordance with Policy 64. Making sure we have public access for recreation, not just hunting, and ensuring that we have subsurface and surface rights that stay pertinent to the land during the transfer is a key component that I think is important to the public and wildlife as we move forward. We want to ensure that wildlife management remains effective, that we have the ability to continue to do surveys. We've talked about implications of the elk incentive tag program, and so that wildlife management component, of course, is critical in this transaction, ensuring that we can be effective in that. Loss of hunting opportunity, of course, is a primary consideration when we look at the loss of potential acreage as depicted on this map, what that hunting opportunity loss looks like to sportsmen. There are some things, again, in this initial map where there's some pretty large blocks of land that were already consolidated in public ownership that were being proposed for exchanging into private ownership. And I think that's one area that the department, thinks that we should be focusing more on those checkerboard areas. Asset and investment losses. The department and the BLM, as an example, have considerable investments on the landscape in the forms of water developments, range improvements, seedings, and so we want to make sure that asset recovery as part of a land exchange would occur and that those investments are recouped. And then again, that going back to policy 64 with that exchange ratio, making sure that things are equitable, and really looking at the valuation of lands being considered. So when we look at valuation of lands, there's a lot of different ways to value land. Of course, the typical way would be a monetary appraisal. Monetary appraisals do not always align with ecological values and resources. And so the map that's shown here is it's called an eco-state map, but essentially this map looks at vegetative cover through time using satellite data in 3 to 5 year incremental blocks, and can give you a picture of condition of the landscape, condition of the ecological resources on the landscape, the vegetative resources. And so this is a great tool for us to look at a broad scale of what is at stake in a transaction when we consider hundreds of thousands of acres of parcels being considered. So if you'll note these colors, generally speaking, the green and the light green are that good and intermediate condition shrubland that's important to species like sage grouse, mule deer, pygmy rabbits. So when we look at the proportion of those acres that were depicted in that original map, that would be transferred to private ownership, that's a pretty significant loss of good condition habitat that would be privatized as compared to what the BLM would be receiving for public. So it's a significant piece when we look at this from a valuation standpoint. And again, this coloration on this bar chart here ties right back to that map, and I can leave that up. So the browns on the one end are kind of your pinyon juniper woodland areas, and then again transitioning over to your shrublands in that green condition or green color. So with our concerns and with our conversations that we've had, we've provided again these overarching key recommendations to Western Lands Group on how really we think things that need to be identified and met. So we need to ensure a net conservation gain to wildlife and habitat as part of this exchange. We need to ensure an equitable exchange ratio for resources. Again, coming back to that monetary valuation might not be an applicable approach when considering the needs of wildlife. Ensuring those key rights, surface and subsurface, would stay pertinent to the land. Example, mineral rights and water rights. Consider it a right for right type of exchange. Want to ensure no net loss of public access or even expanded public access as part of the exchange. And then identifying some of those key values, migratory habitat for mule deer and other ungulates, protection of special status species, be it sage grouse. We are considering, does it make sense to transfer sage grouse habitat, sage grouse leks into private ownership? Those are the types of things that we need to make sure we're thinking about moving forward. And then lastly, that meeting I referenced here just a couple weeks ago is that the public stakeholder engagement. And we have strongly encouraged Western Lands Group to more formally engage the public in a consistent manner through this process as they proceed. And I think that's how we're going to develop the best exchange moving forward if that's the desire. So again, pretty quick presentation on our engagement with Western Lands Group on behalf of the Wine Cup Gamble. But given that, I come back to policy 64. I'll just leave that up there and would just ask the commission how you'd like to proceed.
Questions for Caleb? Vice Chair Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just be curious, you talked about more public engagement. I know that earlier today, during CAB comment, I think Elko CAB Chair Jim Cooney mentioned there's a meeting coming up maybe the end of September or something like that. And it sounds like you guys have met with them most recently, you guys being NDOW, and that maybe the timeline has changed a little bit. I thought I saw in here maybe 2025. So I guess my question is, where do we stand today? Is the ball in NDOW's court to do something, and the ball in Wine Cup Gambles to come back and engage the public and re-engage on some compromise on what this may look like? Where are we at today, and where do we stand?
Yeah, great question, Commissioner Rogers. For the record, Caleb McAdoo. I think, we appreciate Western Lands Group approaching us, that this is not our exchange in any form. So I think, how they choose to navigate through their process and their proposal is ultimately going to be up to them. And I think they heard our concerns, they heard our recommendations. I could only speculate that, they are listening to that and, are working through some of that process, public process, maybe with Elko Cab. But I couldn't give you a clear picture of where they are going with it. Just what we've told them, and I don't know if Director Genet wants to add more to that, but I think that's my estimation and feeling.
Yeah, for the record, Alan Genet, and I agree with Caleb's assessment. As after that meeting, it's apparent that they've adjusted their timelines. They're looking at 2025. They're, again, they want to know what works for wildlife. They feel as if the way they represented it is they're in a race, or it seems as if they're in a race with the public comment that's come back to them, and and they feel like they haven't even started the car. That's the way they depicted it to us, and so I think they're trying to figure out how to move this forward, given the public pushback and sentiment. And so, again, we represented to them that, we look at models of success in Nevada, like the Pine Forest example, where it was much more consensus-built exchange that was kind of from the ground up. It was talking about where there were opportunities for mixing and matching to find solutions on the ground that worked for everybody, that worked for the ranchers, that worked for, public lands, that worked for wildlife. And we kind of proposed that to them. They took notes and are going to go back and dig into that a little bit more, but I think they're at least contemplating that in the public process piece. And so I would say right now it's in their hands as to how they wish to engage the public or move this forward. As far as a wildlife agency, I do feel that we need to work with them in any degree that they move something forward, because I don't want a scenario where the values of wildlife and the concerns that we have are not represented in anything that ever gets drafted as far as a bill. You don't want it to be there with a void of, knowledge. And so, so we'll try to work with them as we have, trying to highlight values. But I think in that scenario of the Pine Forest example is there's really some nitpicky discussions that need to go on as far as values and what works for each, and we're nowhere near those types of discussions.
Vice Chair Rogers.
Thank you. Just curious also if we've heard where BLM has stood with this. I mean, obviously, if they're having Wine Cup Gamble's having conversations with us, they're probably having conversations with BLM. Just curious if the BLM has come out with any comment or anything around Wine Cup Gamble.
Yeah, for the record, Caleb McAdoo, thank you for the question. You know, really kind of informally in our discussions and conversations with the BLM, it appears that those conversations haven't been occurring as frequently between Western Lands Group and the BLM. You know, kind of, again, informal conversations and discussions with BLM. I believe they have talked to them. I just don't think it's been as regular. I think they recognize that wildlife was kind of a key driver in this, and so they've been putting a lot of emphasis in talking to us. And I do want to say, you know, the department, what we don't want is we don't want to be in a room, you know, by ourselves crafting wildlife-specific language without public involvement. And so that's really where we're trying to get to this balance that Director Janae talks about of we want to make sure wildlife are represented, but we want to do that in a transparent, open environment where people are allowed to provide their input and comment. So.
Commissioner Wise, then Commissioner McNaich.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I appreciate that NDOW's key recommendations. I think we have to see yet whether they're going to take those to heart and consider those in their proposal, but I think that list really keys into some of the primary concerns that I've come up with over the last month, that I've heard from other people over the last month, and so I do think if that's at least a great place to start, so I really do hope they take those to heart, but that list really did kind of key into some of those primary issues that I saw and felt from that presentation, so I appreciate that.
Commissioner McNaich. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Caleb, are you talking about the collaboration working where the department's collecting, you know, input from stakeholders and then providing comment to Wine Cup, or are you talking about sitting at the table with Wine Cup and having that broader conversation with all of NDOW's stakeholders, as with them in the room?
Yeah, again, I think that's not for us to make that decision, but I think a preference more towards the latter would be how I would envision that of, you know, you know, if it's a collaborative consensus, you know, subcommittee, we don't know what that looks like. That's for them to figure out how they receive that engagement and feedback.
So the input from stakeholders wouldn't go through NDOW, it'd go directly to them, is what you're envisioning?
I think so, yeah. We just want to make sure that wildlife is, you know, is represented. And again, we're very appreciative that they have brought us in and are requesting information from us. You know, I think we can't overlook that. They didn't have to do that, and so we want to make sure that we remain engaged, but make sure that there's involvement and feedback in that public process if it continues to move forward.
Commissioner Young.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Caleb, for the presentation. I would echo Commissioner Wise. Appreciate Western Lands coming into Fallon and giving the presentation and working with you guys. I had serious concerns with the proposal at that time, the 3-to-1, the public access, all the stuff that you kind of highlighted, and I still have those concerns, but glad to hear that seems like they've postponed the timeline possibly, because at the time it seemed like it was a pretty tight timeline, so more of a statement than a question, but thank you.
Additional questions or comments?
So I still think it's prudent that we as a commission, even if it's very similar or supportive of what the department has, that we generate a letter that comes under your signature to them and just basically reiterates a little bit of what we're talking about, you know, the collaboration that that we share these concerns that the department's thrown out. These are concerns and, you know, desires. We hope that, you know, we go down this path, and I think it's important for the commission to go on record with something formal as well. That's kind of where I'm at, and it doesn't have to get any more complicated than what I agree. I think what the department put out there, I was sitting here like, okay, what else would you add? I think for now, unless there's more specific conversation that occurs, that those make sense to me too. I don't know if there's anything else we would add, but. Mr. Barnes.
Yeah, just to kind of tag on to what Mr. McNish just said, that I think we do need to come up with some kind of a letter, but I think what needs to be included is our own policy 64 that Caleb brought forward. That's pretty self-explanatory. If we can kind of stick with that as a commission, that's our policy. I think for now, you know, unless there's something else come up, but we need to include that in the letter.
Any additional questions or comments? This is an action item, so if I don't see any, we'll take it out for cab comment. Any cab comment in Las Vegas?
Afternoon, Commissioners. Paul Dixon, Clark Cab. We had a pretty good discussion about this for the last two meetings, and I will just say that overwhelmingly the public, as well as all the cab members, with the amount of information we had, have been leery of saying that this is anything but appears to be bad. I guess the question I have for the commission and the department here to leave you with is that because they're asking for congressional action, where do our congressional staff sit on this? It's one thing to work with the wine cup, but if they wanted to work with in Congress and tack this on to some bill, the backside of some bill sitting there, it could get passed before 2025, guys. And it would just be a done deal. And they could be diverting us, and I'm not saying they are, but they could be diverting us to do everything we're doing right now, and the whole thing is in the works in the background. So I just wondered where our congressional staff stood on this, whether they were apprised, and whether they were looking for this in anything going forward to make sure that everybody's above board. Because the fact of the matter is when you go to do a congressional land exchange, you don't need any input from this group here. Either one of you. Thank you.
Any additional cab comment in Las Vegas? Seeing none. Any cab comment on Zoom? Nope. Okay. Any public comment in Las Vegas? Seeing none. Any public comment on Zoom?
Hi all, Dre Arman with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and just wanted to really echo everything that Caleb went over in his presentation and appreciate you all. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry. Appreciate you all just keeping in mind that no land transfer resulting in a net loss of public lands, waters, and wildlife is acceptable, and that a transfer where the proponent maintains those mineral, water, and grazing rights is not really a forfeiture of the land or a gain for the public. So just appreciate all of your attention to this matter and for advocating for public access. Thank you.
Okay. Any additional public comment? Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Sorry. This is Curtis Moore from Elko County. Yeah, we just up here, we've talked about it at our commission, at the county commission level. And we sent out a letter, I think to you guys, but also to our congressional delegation, just outlining what our concerns are. And I think they're pretty predictable, public access being kind of at the top there. And so we're just sort of continuing to monitor that for whether and if and what a public access plan looks like. So far, we haven't seen one.
Okay. Additional public comment? All right, with that, I will bring it back to the commission. I guess I do have I missed the last meeting, Caleb. I got a question for you. And it might have got asked last time, but this does go through Congress ultimately. You know, if the BLM or obviously the department, if anybody has any opposition, how much weight does that carry once it ultimately gets to Congress in the form of a bill?
I guess I would give you my opinion for what that's worth, but I think, you know, if there's a significant grassroots public opposition, you know, I would imagine the Nevada delegations would be listening to that, and that I would think that that would carry a lot of weight. I don't know that I could comment beyond that, but that would be my thoughts.
Okay.
And I would add, I think Governor Lombardo would probably have interest in it as well. You know, when we've done lands bills in the past, this commission historically has had some influence on that process for sure. There's no doubt about it, with cherry stem roads and modifications of boundary areas and cleanup of the checkerboards in the past. And I know that Congressman Amadei is, you know, he's introduced bills himself, so I know he's very familiar with that process, and I know, you know, he's certainly willing to have those conversations as well. And so, and with the stuff that Jim did up in Pine Forest, you know, there's a roadmap for those conversations. They're tough. It's not straightforward. There's no doubt that it's a grind, but I guess, you know, trying to balance what Paul was talking about, walking forward, throwing out your trust and hoping that you don't get taken advantage of versus coming out with the guns blazing. I mean, you kind of, where do we want to land on that scale? And I certainly think a letter outlining those items, policy 24, why we're responding, and those letters going to the congressional delegation and even the governor's office, I think would be very appropriate. Laying out our hopes and that there's more of a forced conversation, if you will. Like, hey, we want to see these things addressed as well from somebody that can do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't, Commissioner Booth, I don't disagree at all.
Caleb, thank you for your presentation. I'm looking at the minutes from our last meeting in Fallon, and Commissioner Young asked if the Wine Cup Campbell Ranch has considered limiting renewable energy development, and the response was that he confirmed that they would consider it. And the minutes from the Elko County Commissioner meeting indicated that they have applied for energy resource Blue Earth Renewables have applied for a permit for energy. Has that been confirmed or not? Or are you working with the Elko County Commission relative to any of those energy permits?
Yeah, Commissioner Booth, excellent question. Thank you for that. Our information really is largely about the same as the information that you just said there. So we're aware of that February Planning Commission meeting in 2023, where that company addressed the Planning Commission about some leases that they had with Wine Cup. My understanding is that those are on private lands currently held, so we have not been involved in that. We've referenced that in some of the formulation and basis for our concerns surrounding renewable energy or energy development as part of this land exchange. But yeah, we have not been involved any further. Just listening to those public meetings.
Okay, well, thank you. My concern is that at the public meeting that we had in Fallon, when Commissioner Young asked the question, I got the impression that they were going to be very cooperative and upfront and open with what they're going to be doing with the land. The impression I received from them that it was just going to be a cattle operation to improve, their existing objectives. So it kind of is befuddling to me to see that they gave us an impression at our meeting in February, and then we get a different perspective when we get the minutes from the Elko County Commission. So with that being said, I mean, I know our county advisory board is against it, and some of the advisory boards here in the state have adamantly opposed it. So I think it'd be best from our position is to make a statement so that our congressional group and as well as our state leaders understand who we represent.
Chairman Caviglia, if I might add one thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so there is a proposed transmission line, the North SWIP line, that will run kind of on the western boundary of that map. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that energy could be developed along that line.
Commissioner Young.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm along the lines right now after the presentation from Caleb and the Fallon presentation to be pretty supportive of that letter, in its current form, and to be in opposition of the proposal. With that being said, I'm always willing to, engage, or you guys have continued to engage conversations with them. But from what the presentation in Fallon and kind of what we've learned today, I still, at least myself, would stand in opposition to the current proposal that they've provided.
And again, I missed the last meeting. Have they really formally provided a proposal yet, or are we in just its infancy?
Yeah, Chairman Caviglia, Caleb McAdoo for the record. They have reiterated multiple times that, the map that is depicted is not a formal proposal. It was a draft proposal for consideration. It's that starting place. Again, we can't speak for them. That's kind of the message that I think I heard at Fallon as well. I think that's the message that they told the commission. Our most recent meeting, that concept of the boundary of possibilities with the grazing allotments and ownership. I don't think they've ever characterized it as their final proposal or even a draft proposal.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Commissioner McNitch said, I'm at the point too, there's like a fine line you kind of want to walk, do you come right out of the gate with both guns blazing, right, kind of deal. And for me personally, I don't know if you want to, at this point, take that stance yet, myself, but.
I think what Commissioner Young, what Paul was suggesting, opposing its current conceptual or draft form or whatever information we've been provided, I think there's a landing spot there where we're basically saying, hey, we hear you talking, we don't know enough. We're still doing the dance here. We're not sure how much we trust you, and you don't know how much you trust us. So let's, we're going to go on the record as saying, we're not anywhere near agreeing with what you're conceptually or proposing, whatever it is. But we're certainly willing to hear you out and hear the conversation. We want to be at the table. We want our stakeholders to be at the table. And, so we need to start with what does that process look like and see. I mean, on one hand, the talk about the leases, and on the other hand, they extend their deadline. So I still don't know what to think. I'm still not sure what to think. I mean, I do feel like, and I'm not hammering on these guys, but I do feel like, I don't feel like I'm being lied to, but I don't know if I'm asking all the right questions either. They're not going to, I feel like I'm not having everything shared with me involuntarily. I feel like we're having to ask all the right questions to get the information that we're wanting to, and that I don't like that feeling.
And I'd like to stress in any kind of a letter, I definitely highly support, want to continue to work with you. That's not in any way, I don't want to represent that, but I think with what we have, to Commissioner McNitch's point, that's where I would stand.
Commissioner Barnes.
Yeah, and I think along those lines, that's kind of where our policy 64 comes in. I mean, that's our policy. We can state that, and for these reasons, that's why we're opposed. Is because it doesn't fall in line with what our own policy is, and then we can just leave it there and then make further comments as we go down the road.
Commissioner Wise.
Yeah, I would absolutely support a letter that states our policy and reiterates that we agree with the recommendations from NDOW. Anything in that form. For your knowledge, while nothing was considered formal at the last meeting, they also had this potential deadline of legislature for next year, which implied that things were much more ready to go than perhaps this draft, not even finalized plan that we're talking about now. And so I think that created some urgency on our part, as this must be further down the line than the way it's being presented in order for you to take it to the legislature next year. Theoretically, if it's pushed out, that alleviates some of that. Then that makes me feel better about the idea that we have a long way to go yet in kind of formalizing what is going on with this proposal and where they're willing to take it and what they want to do with wildlife. But the sense of urgency at the last meeting was severe. So.
Okay. Additional questions or comments or motion? He's looking towards me. So, all right, I'll take a swing at it. I'll make a motion that we oppose, that we draft a letter to the Wine Cup folks, Western Land Group, whatever it might be, that's in opposition to their current or conceptual or draft proposal. I think this is verbiage that the department will have to work on with, maybe in coordination with the chair. And reiterating, stating our policy 64, the importance to our stakeholders of the conversation, and outlining concurrence and agreement with the points that the department made, that these are concerns of the commission as well. And that would be my statement. And I give editorial, leeway to the department and or the chair. If this needs to go out before November, I don't know what you guys want to do with that. So that's my motion.
Mr. Maker, the motion, could I get you to add that we include a copy of this to our congressional delegation?
Absolutely, yes. I accept that, yes.
And I just want to make sure congressional delegation would be inclusive of the governor's office.
And the governor's office, I'd be open to that as well, so yes.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Okay. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously with Commissioner Walther absent, and I will work with the department on that letter. Good, thank you. All right. Agenda item number 11, Commission Policy 23, Predation Management for Possible Action, third reading. Administrative Procedures, Regulations, and Policy Committee Chairman David McNinch and Management Analysis Kaylee Musso. The Commission will review Commission Policy 23 and may make any necessary changes and may decide to repeal, revise, or adopt the policy. Okay, Kaylee, can I say a couple things before we turn it over to you? So, with Policy 23, we're all painfully aware of the effort that's gone through to to revise Policy 23, to update it, to review it per our statutory requirements. We've probably been on it for better part of a year and a half on this particular policy in one form or another. This last legislature, we did have a bill that went through that basically changed how we need to approach the management of predatory wildlife through our policy. So that's prompted a complete rewrite, I guess largely a rewrite. And we've had the conversations, do we take
the old policy, do the dreaded strike through and, you know, addition stuff. So you can see the old policy and the new. We tried that in a less complicated than this would be, and it didn't work. It was very difficult. So the department has basically said, hey, and I agree with them on this, we're just basically scratching the other one out, and here's our new one. And we're trying to address the two-box issue, so lethal predator control or other, the management, the research, the control in non-lethal ways of predatory wildlife. And the way that this was drafted was to stick to the statutory language as much as possible, because I know the department got pounded with suggestions to favor one box over the other. Okay, hey, add this in there, add this in there. So the department's proposal makes sense to me, that hey, we're asking you, do you want it to go to lethal management or do you want it to go to non-lethal, basically? And so the language that's used was largely right out of the NRS, how it was approved. And there were some changes in this current, the policy that we have here, some things that Kaylee will go over that kind of keep those separate, and I'll let her explain the major changes to it. And we're not going to have answers to some of the questions like what happens to projects that are currently going on and how do they transfer into the new system. Those will play out over time, but I think there's confidence that they will transition. It'll transition fairly smoothly, fairly quietly as we consider these projects. I'll let Kaylee go from there, but Kaylee, is there anything else you wanted me to say? Are you good?
No, thank you,
Shut up
Commissioner
and let me
McNinch.
deal with this? Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Cavilla. Management Analyst Kaylee Musso for the record. Commissioner McNinch was correct in stating that we separated out anything that would deal with that second pot of funding, essentially. So Policy 23 was updated to reflect changes made from the committee over the last year and a half, but then also to reflect changes from AB 70 of the last legislative session. This Policy 23 that you're seeing will now solely address lethal predation for predatory wildlife, as will the predator management plan. So the predator management plan won't have any habitat activities or research activities. I do want to point out the third paragraph down on the first page, so second paragraph under purpose. This is the biggest change in the policy. And it essentially says that research, management, and habitat activities funded and conducted for the benefit of non-predatory game species pursuant to NRS 502-253-1B, which is that second pot of funding, will be submitted and evaluated in conjunction with the Heritage Grant proposal process. So most of you are familiar with the Heritage Grant program. Those are similar projects to research, management, and habitat activities. So any projects that the department will need to do concerned with research, management, and habitat activities will go through that Heritage Grant proposal process. There will just now be two pots of funding, so they'll be ranked and scored and funded accordingly. I also just wanted to point out a couple of spots where I took out any mention of habitat research or management projects. There are a couple places in the policy that I missed where it mentions non-lethal predator control. So for example, on page 2, number 3, towards the bottom, the second line from the bottom, there's a mention of and or non-lethal. That needs to come out in every place in the policy. You see that there's a couple mentions of that in number 4. The second change I had that's not included in this version is under predation management plan and report procedures. Number 1, that last line should say descriptions of control projects must include, semicolon. And then on letter P, the reference to Pittman-Robertson funding needs to be removed. We don't use PR funding for predator management, or for lethal control anyways. And then the last change I have that is not incorporated is in number 7 on page 4. The second to last line in number 7 mentions habitat work conducted if applicable, and that will be removed.
Other than that, I think this policy is pretty good to go. I'm available for any questions. I'm sure some of you might have questions about how that habitat, the heritage grant proposal process would affect those habitat projects.
So Kaylee, if I could just, one quick question. Were we going to include the former U under, for clarifications?
Yes, so we did get some public comment. Originally, project summary was a letter U, and we had added a couple of descriptions behind that to include like a cumulative expense for the projects, the remaining funds left on that project, how long that project has been going, so on and so forth. Those concerns are still in this policy. They are addressed in separate letters. So for example, letter G is the duration of the project, which was one of those terms under U that we added. In letter P addresses those cumulative expenses and remaining funds. However, the department is totally fine adding those back into letter Q as well behind project summary.
Okay. And I think considering the changes, and I appreciate that they've been incorporated, and I agree that we try to get rid of as much ambiguity as possible, but I think this is a good place to be a little redundant. So if there's a way to incorporate that into Q, that would be great.
I also, sorry, Chairman, Kaylee Musso for the record, I failed to mention this change won't be in place until obviously the next application period, and then we won't have an idea of the funds until which funds will go where until 2025. So until 2025, the predator plan will continue as you're used to.
And I guess I agree with Commissioner McNitch. I don't necessarily mind adding what used to formerly be U, because we had a fair bit of discussion multiple times about keeping that in there. And I don't have a problem with doing that again. And I think I wrote down some notes like the U I thought we landed on was a status update. And that was cost expenditures, dollars left, years, I can't even read my own handwriting, it's pretty bad. The years of the project, the status, and then I guess the years would give you the lifespan, but that was kind of the gist of what we had in there. Any additional questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, this is an action item, so I'll take it out for cab comment. Any cab comment in Las Vegas?
For the record, Paul Dixon, Clark. I want to thank Kaylee for her clarifications, because a lot of the concerns that were raised by the public as well as the board dealt with Pittman Robertson still being in there since it was there. And I said, well, look, everybody knows you can't use PR funds for that. So if they were going to do anything non-lethal, then you could leave in PR funds. But if you remove it, that's fine. And the other one was you. There was a lot of concern about you. And I felt that if you read through the alphabetical letters and then looked on the back at some of the implementation, you was covered. It's covered implicitly in there, so when you did the roll-up, it was there. But the clarifications you made, I think, go a long ways to saying that I think Clark Cab doesn't have any concerns after listening where things stand right now. The only thing is that in the future, when we decide to scrap a policy and come out with a brand new one with no red line, you need to have a front page kind of explaining how any important things got mapped, if anything, there. That would be my only recommendation of the department, because it was very hard for me to say what happened to you. And I was looking in there to see where things went. And I made the assumption you was rolled in there because I have full faith and trust in the department. That's why it passed, but other people were concerned with that. So thank you.
Any additional cab comment in Vegas? Seeing none, any cab comment on Zoom? Okay, seeing none, any public comment in Vegas?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Jana Wright, resident of Clark County. If I understood the discussion part, you're adding you, the meat and potatoes of you, but it's going to be on Q. Is that correct? Is that what you were discussing? Yes, okay. So if you do that, I would very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Any additional public comment in Vegas? Seeing none, any public comment on Zoom? Okay, seeing none, I will bring it back to the commission.
So there's this concept out there of including a predator management matrix to, consider the validation or validating a predator project. Could you guys comment on that for me?
Thank you, Commissioner McNinch. Yes, I believe that matrix is intended to score predator projects similar to how the habitat conservation projects or the heritage grant proposal projects are scored. Sorry. But I will leave it to Deputy Director Mike Scott if he wants to add anything else to that.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. At the Wildlife Damage Management Committee meeting last year, both the committee and I believe Wildlife Services Director Mark Ono suggested that we create a predator management matrix for basically scoring predator management projects that are proposed. Now, this was specifically for the mule deer enhancement program, but I think it could be used for just about anything. So we've kind of got a matrix for habitat projects and investigations, and what we would consider doing is creating a matrix that would be for predator projects, and it would just allow a score to allow separation so that you can see what projects potentially have the most value and what might not. I believe this last year we had 4 predator projects that were proposed in the mule deer enhancement program, and there's really no way to separate them out, no way to say, yes, this one's a really good one, or no, that one probably isn't going to work, or we'll do that one later, something along those lines. So it would just be a way to create separation between projects should we get 5, 6, 7 projects that we can't afford to do all. And so, yeah, we could probably roll that into some language rolled into this policy where it would allow us the ability to create that matrix.
Okay. So I don't, for me personally, I don't have a problem with, here we are, we're going to go to November with this anyway. Likely, I don't see us approving it completely today. So for me, I'm open to, I think that's good. I think having those evaluations and justifications and thought processes out there, I think they have value. And especially with the program that we've had, whether people are in complete agreement with it or not over the years, it's been largely quiet for the last several years. That was a real lengthy policy, but things have been okay. And now with this big change, I think if there's a way to enhance that and continue to have those justifications added and enhance that a little bit, I'm certainly on board with it. So you've got ideas on how you would include that?
Mike Scott for the record. I think for this policy, we would just create the language that would direct it. And I would probably rely on Staff Specialist Pat Jackson and the Game Division staff to create that, and probably go through the Wildlife Damage Management Committee or various other staff to try to make it as good as we can. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but it does allow separation for those projects. So.
Any additional questions or comments? As much as I hate keep kicking the policy 23 can down the road, because we've kicked it a lot. being that it really can't be implemented in its new format, like we said, till 2025. I mean, do we need to make a motion to direct the department to add that? Or can we just direct them to add that and then we'll bring it back again another time?
Well, we've certainly given, editorial license to people to incorporate those. So it might be, if we approve a policy with that concept, it'll be a little sight unseen. I'm not overly concerned about that. We could have, we've got the concept on the table. We have an idea. It doesn't have to get complicated, that's for sure, just this idea. Are you hoping that we don't bring it back in November? Is that?
No,
you're
I
okay
say,
with November?
I'm saying we bring it back in November.
Yeah.
Do we need to make a formal motion, or does the department already kind of know what we're looking for?
It's 6 one, half a dozen the other. I mean, it's, I trust that they can incorporate it for us and just bring it back with the changes that Kaylee's suggested, and more cleanup than anything on Kaylee's stuff, taking the non-lethal part out and management when we're talking about a policy that will just address lethal stuff. So I don't have a problem with the department. They understand what we're hoping for, and they can just, if they bring it back to us, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah. All right, with that, we'll kick the can again, and hopefully in November we can smash the can. All right, with that, we'll go to agenda item number 12, Commission Policy 65, for possible action, designation of wildlife management areas, second reading, Habitat Administrator Mark Freese. The commission will review Commission Policy 65 and may make any necessary changes and may decide to repeal, revise, or adopt the policy.
Good afternoon, Chair Caviglia and fellow commissioners. Mark Freese, Habitat Division Administrator. If you recall at the August commission meeting, we gave a brief PowerPoint on the Pole Canyon conservation and public access easements. Just to refresh your memory, the Pole Canyon conservation and public access easements were executed in December of 2022. These private properties occur in the East Humboldt Range near Elko, and basically, the public access easements have several public access restrictions and limitations. In order for us to regulate those, we need to designate this area as a cooperative wildlife management area. And so it's the department's recommendation to the commission to include in Policy 65, Pole Canyon is a cooperative wildlife management area. If you look at the Policy 65 itself, under the cooperative wildlife management areas, item 2 has been added, calling Pole Canyon a cooperative wildlife management area. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? Okay. I think this is pretty straightforward. So I'll take it out for cab comment. Any cab comment in Vegas?
For the record, Paul Dixon, Clark Cab. I want to thank you for picking the only 3 topics that we had comments on in the cab to be on Friday. First off, under NAC 504-135 subsection 4, they use the word toxic. And to my knowledge, the only toxic thing we have out there by the Fish and Wildlife Service is lead. So why are we saying toxic and not just saying lead? Was a question that was asked by the cab. And number 2, in the newly inserted Pole Canyon Cooperative Wildlife Management section, where we have electric or battery-assisted vehicles or service animals, we're making no provision for ADA rules with either one of those. And I want to make sure that we don't put together something out there that doesn't accommodate ADA, because you're going to need both of those in those subsections, either electric vehicles or service animals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Any additional cab comment in Vegas? Okay, seeing none. Any cab comment on Zoom? Okay, seeing none. Any public comment in Vegas? Okay, any public comment on Zoom? All right, with that, I will bring it back to the commission. Everybody's tired. Real quick question. So as this is a second reading, can we adopt the policy then as written? Okay. All right, so I guess I'll make a motion to adopt the policy, Commission Policy 65 as presented. Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously with Commissioner Walther absent. Agenda item number 13, public comment period, informational. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. No action can be taken by the commission at this time. Any item requiring commission action may be scheduled on a future commission agenda. Persons making comment are asked to begin by stating their name for the record. Any public comment in Las Vegas? Seeing none. Any public comment on Zoom? Seeing none. Okay, we're adjourned for today, and I will see everybody tomorrow morning at 8. Thank you.